And hello, everybody. Welcome to Tuesday night's Narrative Live. It's good to be with you. I'm Zev Shalev. Eric Garland is with us again. How are you, Eric?
To quote Keith Richards, it's great to be here. It's great to be anywhere.
It's also great to be 7 days away from what I think is going to be a momentous election. I really am expecting a tremendous amount of votes for the Democrats. I know I'm sort of, everyone's talking about the exact opposite, about this red tide and about this red wave. I just don't see that happening. I think that in 7 days from now, we're going to have a watershed moment in American history where we really are going to see the Democrats, I would call it a landslide. A landslide might be a little excessive for what they may achieve, but I think they will win the Senate and the House. And I think there'll be all sorts of surprises in various state houses where some polls are showing that some state houses are going to flip to Democrats. And then, of course, the big governor's races and some other races are going to go Democrat too. So I'm feeling pretty bullish about the next 7 days. And, it all is up to Americans to actually just go out and do the voting that they need to do. I mean, I remember it always reminds me of South Africa's election in 1994, 27th of April, 1994 is the day that South Africa had its first sort of fully democratic elections, and people showed up in their millions, lined up in rows. Actually, I pulled up some pictures. I wonder if I can show them to you here. I'll have to pull them up again in a little bit and show it to you. But there's these long lineups of white, black, every kind of race you can imagine, all lining up peacefully around the country. Deciding on a new future, deciding to move themselves into a new dynamic. And I think that's what this election is about. I think this is going to be the election that the GOP gets counted out. And if they do get counted out, it means that the rest of us, the sane thinking part of the population is able to actually forge a new America that is going to be far more equitable and far more about what the founders of this country promised than ever before. So that's my hope for next Tuesday. I'm putting all my energy into that, and I hope everyone votes away as we try to save democracy in just 7 days. And I think we have a good shot of it.
Well, I mean, it's really special that you can share that with our American audience here, that this is a precious thing to be able to have your vote counted, your voice heard. And I think the Australians have had the best deal with democracy sausages. If you vote, you get free sausage, which is, and they have like a department of democracy. I'm not making this up. It would be a good joke, but they really do this. And I'm like, those are civilized people. It's like, how do we get them to vote? It's illegal not to vote. And if you go vote, you get sausages. But in other places, people stayed in prison 20, 30 years. They were willing to be subject to all kinds of violence and indignity. And you got to watch it go over to that first vote in the new South Africa.
Yeah, it was really a remarkable moment in time. I mean, it was truly historic, obviously. And to just be working at a local radio station, there's one of my first jobs in journalism. I was like just loving every minute of it, obviously. But that morning, we were nervous. There was a little bit of nervousness in the air. And our choppers, the choppers who do the traffic reports for our local radio station, were the first sign that things were going to go well. Because then, they were up in the air and they were like going to all the polling booths and the polling stations saying, no, this looks peaceful. It actually looks fine. People are getting along just fine, standing in line, having a democratic process, getting to see each other, and quite joyously so. And wow. Then, as we know, it landed up being the election that elected Nelson Mandela, the president of South Africa, a very different new South Africa, where the whole course of South Africa changed. And I think next Tuesday is really that kind of day. You could really see that happen.
Now, you met Nelson Mandela, didn't you?
Yeah, I met him a couple of times. When I say meet, I am so in awe of the guy that I didn't actually, just a very young junior producer, I was there and I said hello, but I did not interact in a meaningful way. But I'll tell you, there's a beautiful story where he came to this radio station, Radio 702, where I was working late at night for a talk show that I was producing to answer calls. And it was a pretty big deal. Mandela was coming around during the election campaign. And so he comes in there, and there's, the executives of the radio station had laid out this very nice, table of food and all sorts of stuff, as they would for any VIP guest. And he arrives. He's gracious to everybody. His soul enters a room like well before he does. You just feel him in the space, and then he comes in and he's just this smile beaming out of him, and he's after that kind of years of imprisonment, just to have that kind of beauty that he had, it was remarkable. But he also had this beauty where he didn't talk to all the executives. I mean, he did say hi to all the executives, but the person that he actually landed up sitting next to was the station cleaner who had been there cleaning the studios every night. And he sat down with her, and he had a piece of cake with her. And I don't know what they spoke about because I didn't speak Xhosa at the time. But it was one of those moments where you thought, oh, this is just a precious human being who is single-handedly changed a country. And it was single-handedly. It was something he did just on his own. And I've had the honor of meeting people like Barack Obama. Same kind of vibe, although it's certainly not as deep and as suffering as Nelson Mandela was. But certainly great to be able to meet those kinds of people and then see them get to where they to see their fulfillment of their dream. The night before, by the way, I should tell you, it was tense as anything. Like nothing felt like it was going to hold together. I was on the phone with Nelson Mandela's people demanding we get the first interview with him, which we did the next morning on a broken telephone, and also interviewing Mangosuthu.
Wait, you get the first interview with Nelson Mandela?
Yes, one of my greatest bookings ever was to get the first interview with Nelson Mandela, and it was because I went to his spokesperson and I said, after the elections. This is after the elections. So after he cast his vote, I got the first interview. And I did this because they were going to give it to the government broadcasters, the SABC. And I literally blew up to Carl Niehaus, who was then his spokesperson at the night before. And I said, Carl, after everything, because I'd worked at this radio station that was pretty, democratic leaning and independent and was right there all the way through the entire thing. And I was like, after everything we've done for you, you're going to let government broadcasters have you first? And he reneged. He's actually said, yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to give it to you. So it landed up being a very broken phone conversation over a cell phone in Nelson Mandela's hard of hearing. But it was an interview. So it got on the air, and I got to say, congratulations, Madiba, probably amongst the first people in the United States, in South Africa to be able to do that on that day. So that was a good day. It was a good day. And I think next week, if people sort of embody this idea that this is a change election, this is not just an election about, the inflation or abortion, all those things which are super important, but it's also the future of America. And this is really what we're voting about. We're voting about, is it going to be a democracy? Is it going to be a whatever version of autocracy the GOP want to enforce? We are moving in one of those directions. And we're going to decide, I think, next Tuesday which direction we're going to move into. So, it should be momentous. It should be that every single person who can vote does vote, and hopefully they do, because it's the vote of our lives, as it says right there on the screen.
Well, another major facet of this election is it comes on the heels of one that we're still investigating that was so beset by violence and controversy. And that was a subject of a massive malign conspiracy, and we're doing it again. And the question is, what's different? The U.S. attorney's offices have been naming their election officers. Now, this is the U.S. attorney. So there's the feds, the DOJ, because those guys are tireless these days. They are announcing, who the points of contact are for anything that smacks of criminality, fraud. We're on it. So it's like, if you're worried that your vote is somehow going to be tampered with, there are more eyes on how this is all working than there has ever been. And on top of that, the turnout is extremely high. With the early voting data is coming in. This is not a typical midterm election. It is not, it's almost assured that when one party takes over the White House, that there's a backlash. It's a very common trope and pattern, and it's certainly the numbers in some of the elections that we're seeing in some of the poll data, like Sherry Beasley versus Ted Budd in North Carolina. I just saw that's down to a 1-point race.
Interesting.
There, and
25 million people. have cast their votes. Most of those people are Democrats already. Now, they're not the younger demographic, apparently. They're still, the younger demographic is probably going to show up on that day, which is actually quite good because it means that there is going to be a buildup into that day as well. But the fact that 25 million people have already voted, I mean, that's a lot of votes.
Yeah.
And mostly Democrats, mostly people, motivated by saving democracy and by abortion. Those are the things that they're voting for. And that's, I've been listening to the closing arguments by Obama and Biden. And, that's the theme. The theme is democracy matters. Who you represent matters. It'll change your life. It could change your life. And in this case, I think will change your life. So just voting, party loyal is so silly on these kinds of days. You've really got to think about who your candidate is, whether they really represent you, and whether you can abide by their party. I mean, the GOP is just a mess. You can't look at any of these candidates and think that they're electable. Almost so many of them, at least, are not electable.
I think more importantly, the content of the character of the candidates is a big issue for me as well, of course. But I'm in Missouri, and I've got 2 solid weeks where I can vote at a number of locations. We still have Jay Ashcroft, who's the son of John Ashcroft, who is Secretary of State here, and there's some questions about voting in 2020. But we've got a Republican supermajority here in Missouri, and despite all that, I've got more access to vote now than I did 2 years ago.
Yes.
So, and
the early voting thing is quite new for a lot of people. I mean, it sort of has been around, but not in the scale it has now. And the fact that you've got these 2 weeks to do all this stuff, it's amazing. It really changes the dynamic.
And a lot of people don't think of the implications of having voting on a single day, and having long lines. Because if you have people that have to take the bus to work, they don't own an automobile, and they have hourly wage jobs where the managers may not be very sympathetic to them wanting to exercise their democratic rights. Here, having voting on a single day takes out a huge chunk of those people who deserve representation. Opening it up to several days and giving people breathing room so that it's like, well, I don't have to work on Wednesday. I can go I can take the bus from here to there and make it back. And I don't have to, I get there, oh my God, there's a 4-hour line. I'm going to get fired. I can't get fired. I mean, there's, a whole lot of people that have the right to vote, but that will, have to pay a much higher cost than others who are more fortunate. And one man, one vote, one person, one vote in this country. And to get closer to that, doing this, I mean, who'd have thunk it? We are making progress.
Yeah. 2 things that just to pick up on what you just said there. Last time round in the 2020 elections, we had what we called a red mirage, where on voting day, it looked like the Republicans were going to win everything. And that's the basis on which Trump landed up declaring victory and, opposing the Biden victory. But in reality, a lot of the early voting or mail-in voting was then going to be counted afterwards. And that was going to bring up a lot of the Democratic ballots from Democratic regions. And that was going to balance out the vote. This time it's going to be different because I think a lot of the early voting is already being counted. So I think in some ways we might have a Democratic surge right at the beginning, and it may just stay all the way through the end. I don't know exactly how each precinct or each district is counting the votes in which order, but I think it's going to look a little different than it did in past years. Although it certainly could take weeks for us to get the final result.
It could, but how it worked, 20 years ago, even they take statistical samples, mm-hmm. and, the provisional ballots get counted later. And very serious mathematicians and actuaries are in, that are in the business of making sure that those samples are representative of what just took place, and getting the exact count may take a while, but we actually have had more of a sophisticated system than some of the, domestic terrorist organizations would like you to believe. Now, we're going beyond that, and we are tightening this down even more. There's going to be, even more, oversight and observation, and hopefully prosecution if anybody's messing around. And this is... if nothing else, I think it is really important that, on so many levels, that we get America away from where it was, which was apathetic about civics, apathetic about how the government actually runs, because there were people like the Koch brothers that are like, hey, we're going to get 66% of the state houses. And when we have those, then we're going to call for constitutional convention and we're going to rewrite this constitution the way we want. And I think the old one is really good. And all of our laws are based on it. And we as Americans, we weren't privy to what that plan was. And we were not actively defending, simple things: access to the ballot, right to vote, making sure that mobs don't invade the Capitol and defecate on desks, things that are part of any functioning democracy.
Yeah. The other thing that comes to mind is that because there is so many people that are voting this year early, and a lot of the surge in the number of registrations means we can't really rely on polling. So no matter where you are, if the race is even remotely close, you got to vote. If you just have to vote, because you don't know. I mean, they're talking about even a red surge in parts of New York State, and I'm like, who would have thought that would have happened? But it might happen. So, no matter where you are, it used to be that it came down to just these few swing states, and it probably will come down to just a few swing states. But every single vote counts this time, because there is an unpredictability with a number of new voters that are showing up at the polls, and new registered voters, especially with so many big issues at play. You just got to believe that there'll be every vote must count. And that means everyone needs to go out and vote. So if you haven't made a plan yet, do it. And then also dreaming the possibility of what it might be. How amazing would it be to have a House and a Senate and a presidency that could fulfill some of the Biden agenda, which is so, smart and it does the job and appeals to the people, and actually takes care of the people of America and looks to the future and competes with China and does all these things that you want an agenda to do. And how great it would be for just a little bit of time for America to actually pull the stuff together, get us back on track, and then proceed with the future, which will be quite phenomenal if we can do all those things, whether it's semiconductors, which we like to talk about here a lot, or AI, or all the other incredible things that freedom can help us develop. That can only happen if we get this agenda through. And, we don't want the GOP shutting down the government in the first week, or, starting investigations about nonsense like they did with Clinton. I mean, this is not what we need right now. We need a really big, decisive victory that says to the world and says to all of America, this is who we are, this is who we're going to be, and this is how we're going to march forward into the future. And the GOP is the past. It is not the future, and people know that.
Well, I mean, we are making strategic moves as a nation because of the Biden administration that have been 50 years in coming. Including disengaging with China, no longer engaging with them, not deepening our commercial and industrial ties with them. In fact, shutting them down and drastically changing the world supply chain. That's huge. Yeah. We've been doing the other thing for over 30 years, and there were good reasons theoretically to do it, even though we probably should have read America versus America by Wang Huning, who's like, here's how we destroy America. And that guy's been
It was just there in black and white. I didn't realize it was written there.
We need to take their farmland in the Midwest. And then,
that's their plan.
Yeah. And, make sure that when we should manufacture stuff for them that doesn't work, because they really rely on technology and they don't have traditions that we do that go back a long way. So if their stuff breaks, they're going to cry all the time. Well,
right.
Also, right. Pretty okay. So maybe the decision to engage was a little optimistic on our part. Well, that's done.
But it hasn't worked for them. They seem to be in a lot of trouble. I mean, they are going to try build this alliance with Russia and march on into the separate universe that they're in. But the rest of the world is not coming along with them, as far as I can tell. Well, maybe Bibi Netanyahu will. We'll get to that in just a second. But there is a lot of it just certainly seems to me like the Biden administration has done what they've needed to do to get us to a point where we can reestablish, not that we needed to, but reestablish America's leadership in the world. But then beyond that, now is the chance for the American electorate to actually choose to be united under one agenda that actually takes us forward. There's no point in this combat politics that we've been doing that has been inspired by foreign forces. We know that it's not coming internally. These are things that China and Russia and all these other states with these skills in propaganda and skills in creating division and polarization. That's why we're having this constant battle in America. It's not because we genuinely hate each other. I just don't believe that. I think that we just have to get rid of the party that's sold out and march forward to the party that has a plan. And then beyond that, we need to rebuild a strong conservative party or conservative movement in this country that is like the old GOP was, because that really is where most of Americans are living. They're not living in MAGA world. They're not living out in the extremes, in the QAnons. They're not doing that. They're living in the middle of the spectrum, and that's where they should be.
And most of them aren't driven by politics, but by their needs and economic issues. And when we're going to rip out the supply chain from China and we're going to start making semiconductors in Southern Ohio, I forget what the calculation of investment is going to be, but it's in the gazillions.
50 billion or something. It's a lot. And then 100 million was just one plant in New York last week. And the interesting thing is, we're also that's going to create another competition in all the other stuff you need to make semiconductors in. So it's one thing building the semiconductors, but you need all the supplies for the semiconductors. That's going to create a whole other war, not a war, competition for those supplies.
Competition, something we're not used to.
America's good at that.
Well, so Zev, do you know what Route 66 is?
I do, of course, I know what Route 66 is. Yeah.
All right, so you know this the Nat King Cole song.
Yes.
If you have a plan to travel west, and it goes down the cities. It goes from St. Louis, Joplin, Missouri, and Oklahoma City. I've driven from St. Louis to Oklahoma City on every chunk of the old 66 that is left. And the Eisenhower highway system overtook that after the war. But when you go down 66, the real 66, and you have to get onto it, and then you have to get off because somebody built a house in front of it. It's wild. You see parts of this country in the middle of the country, in these humble parts of Missouri and Kansas and Oklahoma, and that are these little towns that are they've all kind of fallen into disrepair, but they were part of an industrial landscape, an industrial ecosystem, where little, parts for the railways or for the automobile industry, they were all over. And so these towns that they're forgotten and then flooded with drugs and despair, you have people living there. The reason for that town's existence has kind of disappeared, and no one really explained it to the residents, and that's not their fault, right? And I was from a town that was never very pretty, but it had been in at better times before. In any event, where when we started ripping out entire industries and putting them in other countries, it's not just we think, oh well, Detroit sucks now, and it's it's really a mess, which is true, but it's not just the Detroits. It's the little towns where you put an industry there and employs 80, 180, 280 people, and that's a reason for that town to exist. There's prosperity. You have a school you can go to. It's small enough. What you're. When they talk about the real America, and that small town life, which it's not about Republican or Democrat. That's about cohesive, and there's a reason to be there, and there's some pride in what you create there and what you build there. We went away from that.
Yeah, it's neither Democratic or Republican. It's just the American dream, and the American dream is still out there. It's, it's still very viable. And now's the chance to recapture that. It's true that, during these last few years, Chinese monopoly on all this production has meant a lot of jobs has moved over there. It meant a lot of production has moved over there. That's 100% true. But that's going to come back now. We can build that. There's nothing that says we can't do any of the things that they do in China in the United States. It's all perfectly okay for us to do it in the United States, and we should be doing it. We have people who are smart and capable and can do it, and we have new technologies that are going to make it more efficient and easy to do. And why not? Why not? Why do we have to, Why do we have to send it to China if they're not going to play the game that we want to play with them? Let's talk a little bit about what's in the news, because we've just spoken for 30 minutes about just our opening dreams and ambitions for next week, which is great. And thank you, Eric, for being so bold and just magnanimous about everything you say, because I think you're right about that old dream of a small town just rebuilding itself, and I think that's almost can be a town by town thing, where every town sort of rethinks itself and re-understands itself in a new paradigm. We've got new industries and self-sustainability and all this other stuff coming to that town. It can revitalize small communities everywhere, and should.
Sea to shining sea.
Yes, exactly. Pelosi. I said Pelosi who done it, because I am going to just go out on a limb here and say, okay, there was a guy who attacked the speaker's husband, yes. For political motives, yes. But it feels to me like maybe someone behind the scenes is prodding all this, because it does, certainly benefit one party or the other, or certainly one party, and then also elements within the other party. But, when I looked at the Republican immediate conspiracy theory that popped up through Elon Musk's account on Twitter, I was like, wait a second. They've already got a conspiracy theory about him having a lover and all this other stuff. Which is completely untrue, of course, but they'd already concocted this within seconds of the news breaking. It's got suspicious for me. It got, I don't know who's responsible for it. And we know that the guy is Mr. DePap, also Canadian, by the way. But on the other hand, I don't think that he's just him. I just feel like it's the timing of these kinds of things don't just happen so close to an election, so conveniently close to an election, where Pelosi is such a target as she is this week of the GOP. Normally these things are, if they're going to happen in this kind of staging, it's going to happen probably through a coordinated method. That's just my opinion. I don't have any facts to bear that out, but it's a
I got a couple of facts that'll color that.
Okay, go for it.
So first of all, the DePap's construction as a name is very, very unusual. It's neither French nor Italian. So that's interesting. I guess the suspect took it from his stepfather, which is an unusual matter. But he was down in the United States here, apparently in a relationship with a woman named Olesya Taub, who is a Russian-born nudity activist.
Ah, yes.
There are some details here that are not very typical, even for crazy people who want to hurt others. It's like, okay, so you're from Canada, sort of, but it's not your original birth, and you're here with your Russian nudity activist girlfriend.
And you're attacking the speaker's husband because you care about these policies, but it's just weird. I mean, you're Canadian. No, I'm Canadian and I care about American policies too, but I'm also American, so I get to do a little bit of both. So that's the Pelosi story. I don't have very much else to say about it, except that we hope he gets better. And the family has now heard the 911 tapes. They know what, as much as possible about what went down there. I think there's still a lot of investigation to be done as to who, inspired this beyond just this one activist, but maybe it was just a lone QAnon guy who just decided to do this crazy thing. It certainly reminds us that the Pelosi's have an interesting history.
Sure do.
She is a daughter of a congressman who with a fairly significant mob support base. Now she's not connected to the mob as far as any of us know, but she, her father really was kind of an interesting figure in American politics. And,
have you been to Little Italy in Baltimore?
I have not been to Little Italy in Baltimore. Why?
You should go to Little Italy in Baltimore, and the food is great. And anywhere the food's that good,
there's a mob. There's a bit of a mob going on there.
Yeah. So
sure. I mean, go to any Little Italy and you'll find the mob there. That's what they're there for. That's what they do. But then they become their daughter becomes the Speaker of the House. Then it's significant detail in understanding, how she has become quite a wealthy woman in her life. There's all these things that you could say about Nancy Pelosi. I'm not going to say it today because I just think she's a fantastic human being, and I think she's been a remarkable leader for people in the House, but also for the people of San Francisco. She really is the queen of San Francisco, and there is a lot of love and admiration for her there, and for Paul Pelosi. So Let's hope he recovers quickly. What should we go to next? Mr. Lindsey Graham is going to have to testify in the Georgia inquiry.
Apparently they didn't. So the midnight backdoor side door move by Clarence Thomas apparently didn't stick.
It didn't stick. It didn't stick.
Upwards, the upside down shadow docket that he issued a papal fiat from. It's like, okay, that's interesting. Well, Lindsey's on.
Lindsey's going to have to testify because, you do have to actually respond to these things if you're a U.S. senator or any other citizen of the country. When the court tells you to come and talk to them, you go and talk to them.
This whole fuck off. You're just Congress. You're just that is not how it works for regular people. You end up in the back seat of a sheriff's car with handcuffs on when a judge crooks their little finger. That's how it works for everyone else. So what's this whole? Well, I'm going to have the Supreme Court justice whose wife was part of trying to overthrow this very state selection. He's going to sneak in the side door and say that abracadabra, I don't have to do it.
It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And I don't know what the GOP gets off doing this.
Attorney. Sorry, I haven't popped off or ranted in a while. He's a JAG. He's a Judge Advocate General. He's a colonel in the Air Force. He's an attorney his whole life. And he's like, pish posh, your grand jury subpoena.
And the court was like, this is completely unreasonable, this argument, and threw it out very quickly, as they should have, because it is completely unreasonable. Now, here's Twitter, over at Twitter, which is now, I don't know, China-owned, Saudi-owned, both owned. Elon Musk is doing some crazy
Binance
stuff.
Put up some money.
Yeah.
It wasn't festive until you have the Chinese cryptocurrency run out of Malta.
Yeah,
now we're talking some legitimacy.
Yeah, to have that. So they apparently took down a China-based network that was operating within Twitter. There were two right-wing networks and one left-wing network, interestingly enough, that the Chinese
Dear God, what is MAGA porn? Do I want to know?
MAGA, maybe it's MAGA comma porn? I don't know.
Nope, there's no comma in there.
Just
I don't want to know anymore.
Hate for Trump, China-based. Anyhow, but there you go. Apparently he's trying to look like he's decent. But on the other hand, he's taken down all the or withdrawn all the permissions for the people who used to do the moderations on Twitter. So all the content moderation that we used to get on Twitter, the people who did that can't access the tools to do that anymore. So there's no moderation a week into the elections. You never know what's going to happen. He's fired the board. He's fired the executive team. He's proposing an $8 fee for every blue check that they issue, which is the verification thing that they use. It's a fun place to be, Twitter. I've lost 1,000 more followers every time I go on Twitter. It's like 100 followers less. I don't know where they've gone. I mean, maybe they're trolls, maybe they're bots.
You want to talk about what a brilliant influence op this was? We're in the middle of this really important election. And the people that have blue checks, their rules for these blue checks is not just you verify that you're who you are. It's like you have to have some form of public figure status, so we know that it's you and nobody's stolen your very important account. Yeah. Now, Zeb, do you have a blue check?
No, I never got one. I never considered a legitimate
I still
person.
cherish you.
Thank you for cherishing me, and I envy yours. I envy your blue check every time I look at your account.
Don't.
I wish I had one.
Don't.
It's not that actually. I never do that, but it's annoying not to have one when you should have one. And for political reasons or whatever, they've excluded a bunch of us, and the thresholds to get them are so ridiculous. No one wants to go through them. But
so the people that have them work for major journalistic outlets or have been commented on in those outlets. I don't know, but that's a very self-regarding. The media is a very self-regarding crew, and so if you want people who would normally be making comments and doing content about the abortion laws that are endangering women's health care, or anything really about the election, and you stop with this hey, we'll let anyone in for $8, and all these self-important people stop everything and go, oh, let's talk about me. No, let's talk about the election.
Yeah, we got a week. That's a good point you're making there, that this was a distraction tool, but also I am a little worried about there being no moderation tools available to the moderators there for the next week as we're heading into an election, because as we know, you can really tweak an election by dropping in a couple of stories here and there and amplifying them, as Elon Musk showed us on the weekend, or as Fox News shows us on a regular basis. It's not hard to imagine a world where China or Saudi Arabia wanting to lean in on behalf of the GOP, start pushing narratives and making stories trend, and all sorts of things happen in this week leading up to the elections. I mean, the timing is unfortunate for sure.
All right. So do you know who runs like the top 3 television channels in France?
It's the government, the state of France. Yeah.
Yeah. And BBC. Who runs the Beeb?
The British people do, but the British government appoints everybody. Yeah. British people.
Yeah.
They pay a license fee for that, but they still.
Right. So in other, China will not let the United Arab Emirates run its platforms.
No,
they don't.
They wouldn't let America run its platforms. Never mind.
The Chinese, like you and I could put together the world's biggest hedge fund, and Beijing ain't going to sell us their, WeChat. How are they?
No.
I would love it.
No, I mean, it's. I
don't
understand.
Please sit on the API where all of your citizens are talking? I'm sure I would not construct an enormous intelligence operation personally out of that.
Yeah, I'm sure you wouldn't. I trust you, Eric. Please go. Have at it. Take the entire system. Go for it. It's.
What are we doing here?
I don't understand it. I don't understand why they allowed a Chinese asset to buy the biggest social media platform in politics. I just don't understand why they would do that. I don't understand why he's now implementing all these changes on a whim. Like he can just okay, I'm just going to do all this by myself now. And we all know it's the Chinese and Saudi Arabia. And the more we say that, I bet you the shorter our lifespan is on Twitter right now. Not that we want to tempt fate there, but it's I don't get it. And it's infuriating to me that something that is important as a social network that is the battleground for politics these days is being taken over. This was the last vestige of free speech that we had in America. I'm sure we'll find our way out of this because I trust the people in charge. But it's it's disappointing. I would have wanted Twitter to go in a completely different direction. And
we just had congressional hearings about how many spies were in Twitter.
Yeah, Chinese spies, Saudi spies, spies.
Yeah. So how come we didn't have a full discussion on that?
I didn't even understand. It wasn't meant to happen. It was like 2 weeks ago. It was like, the deal's not going to happen. It's fallen through. And then suddenly you turn around to what? It's like, it is happening. I don't understand that whole turn. I just didn't. I thought I'd given up on even caring about it because I didn't think it was going to happen. And then suddenly it's like, oh well, now he owns it. I'm sure the people there are desperate because it can't be a fun place to work right now. He's like, doing a witch hunt for who supports him and who doesn't support him. It's not exactly, it's not necessarily a positive vibe over there, but it's still a good place to work. And I'm sure a lot of people are trying to figure out how they're going to survive the Elon 2 years there. So I was going to play we should talk a little bit about this before we go away, because it is important that Jair, I don't know if I'm saying his name correctly, Bolsonaro, is no longer likely to be the president of Brazil, though he hasn't quite conceded yet. But quite distressing for me in any event is that Bibi Netanyahu may be soon returning to power in Israel after their 5th election in less than 4 years. It's a lot, guys. Get your stuff together, because I'll tell you why I think this is really important, because I do think Bibi is in the Chinese camp. He is, Israel more than any other country can sort of change the balance of power in the world just by leaning itself into the United States or leaning itself into China. Bibi's leaned into China. I mean, he's very, very leaned into China. So the fact that he's back is going to, or might be back, it can really screw the balance of power that Biden has tried to position the world in since 2016. So since 2020 at least. Israel has a democracy. They get to choose whoever they want to choose, but this guy's a criminal. This guy's had enough time in power to realize what a terrible influence he is. He meddled in America's elections in 2016. You think it's a good idea to let the guy back in? No, it's not a good idea.
And his criminal trials are not complete yet.
Yeah.
And he's got a few of them. He's,
basically Donald Trump. It's basically, it's the same thing. Come on.
Donald Trump, who's actually been charged with crimes. Yeah. Trump, we're still waiting.
Yeah, that's true.
But I mean, he's got 4 different like fraud and corruption charges that are being prosecuted that they have to take time out because he's got to go do something and then he come back. And I mean, I'm sort of wondering like how long some of this feels like it's a bit artificial, where it's like, how long do your trials take? Like, these are bribery trials. Those are, you take the money. Okay. Did you say you do something for it? Well, that's bribery. I mean, it's pretty easy.
I'm sure they've delayed this for political reasons all along. I mean, I've heard rumors that, the Ghislaine Maxwell trial was also delayed in a negotiation attempt around this. So there's all sorts of things that are happening behind the scenes, I'm sure, which might delay things. And who knows, maybe he's negotiated a way back into power, but still not be as pro-Chinese as he's been. But I don't trust the guy. I mean, after what he did by participating in that 2016 invasion of America, it's not okay. And it sets up this dynamic between American Jews and Jews in Israel, the right-wing extreme Jews in Israel, which has never existed before. It's such an anathema, and I don't know why it's necessary to divide the Jewish community up into those 2 different camps, because it's never been the case before. It's 7:43. I was going to do a whole big thing, but I'm not going to do a whole big Dragon's Tail because we just don't have enough runway here to do the whole thing. But there is some really incredibly interesting stuff that came out of the new Trump tapes that were released by Bob Woodward in audiobook form. And if everyone hasn't heard it, go for it, download it or get it through Audible or whatever it is you get your audiobooks. It's really fascinating to listen to Donald Trump as he tells the story, as he tells, I don't know who's coaching whom. Is Woodward telling him how to run the government because he has no idea? And then this really confessional style of interview that Trump does with Bob Woodward over many tapes is really fascinating. I highly recommend it. But it also was brought up to me today that it brings together this notion around COVID, because this is when a lot of these interviews were being taking place, was during the coronavirus years, that Trump really did do something that I first reported way back in when was COVID? 2019? 2020, March 2020.
Released in September, October from Wuhan, and then spread from there.
Right. So I reported, really early on in that whole period that it looked to me like Trump had deliberately allowed the virus to take hold in the United States, that he had these 19 days where he chose to do nothing. And just to remind everyone of where that landed, here is a short excerpt. It's really quite short, which gives you the timeline from that original show that I did. Donald Trump was all about China. He praised President Xi's transparency and assured everyone it will work out well. For a minute, his administration even looked presidential. He declared a federal health emergency, launched a task force, and banned travel from China.
Developed test was only available in public health laboratories in the CDC.
Then in February, the CDC stumbled badly after their coronavirus test turned out to be flawed. Health officials had a backup plan. An approved test from the World Health Organization was just a flight away. But the Trump administration rejected that. Instead of accepting the WHO tests, Trump did something truly bizarre. He went on a 25-day campaign, a media blitz of sorts, downplaying the severity of the coronavirus. The virus was not a threat, he said. It was just another Democratic Party hoax.
What do you say to Americans who are concerned that you're not taking this seriously enough?
That's CNN, fake news.
The president say, for example, he's going to continue with political rallies. Is this sending the right message?
Going to a rally, there's no reason that you shouldn't go.
It's really working out. The president stopped shaking hands.
In our line of work, you shake hands.
No, I don't take responsibility at all, but it's something that we have tremendous control of.
How would you rate your response to this crisis?
I'd rate it a 10. This is a pandemic. I felt it was a pandemic long before it was called a pandemic.
The media blitz was designed to contain any stock market crash, his advisors would later argue. It also coincided with a big deal. Thermo Fisher's $10 billion purchase of a German company. We'll leave it there because that Thermo Fisher deal actually landed up never happening because of some of this reporting. But it's clear to me, and it was certainly my research bore out, that the 25-day tour is when coronavirus took hold in America. It was 25 days of non-action, of allowing the virus to spread. So then comes the interview with Woodward and Trump, and these are tapes taken from the time, and it just reinforces this fact that Donald Trump willfully allowed coronavirus to spread into America.
There's one date on that timeline you missed. I just want to throw in.
Yeah.
Okay, so there was the impeachment, right?
Yeah.
So the vote was on the 4th or 5th of February, and the next day, Mike Pompeo wrapped up a bunch of our ventilators, from our strategic national stockpile and personal protective equipment, and shipped it to China.
So we wouldn't have it. And so here's a couple of clips. This is this is about the conversation that Trump had with Xi Jinping as soon as he found out that the coronavirus was spread into Wuhan as it had been. This is a conversation as he described it to Woodward. It's incredible stuff. Listen to this. In fact, you might want to listen to this.
And so what was President Xi saying yesterday?
Well, we were talking mostly about the virus, and I think he's going to have it in good shape, but, it's a very tricky situation.
Indeed,
it goes through air, Bob. That's always tougher than the touch. The touch, you don't have to touch things, right? But the air, you just breathe the air, and that's how it's passed. And so that's a very tricky one. That's a very delicate one. It's also more deadly than your strenuous flus. People don't realize we lose 25,000, 30,000 people a year here. Who would ever think that, right?
I know. It's
pretty amazing. And then I say, well, is that the same thing? This is more deadly. This is 5 per. This is 5% versus 1% and less than 1%. So this is deadly stuff. But he's got it. I think he's going to do a good job. He built, a number of hospitals in record-setting time. They know what they're doing. They're very organized, and we'll see. We're working with them. We're sending them things, in terms of equipment and lots of other things, and the relationship is very good. Much better than before. Before it was strained because of the deal, but before that, they were just taken advantage of. Like if you go back to Obama, Bush, and other,
Yeah. So, I mean, this is weeks after Xi had been hiding what was going on in Wuhan. I mean, there was already a massive outbreak, and he'd been hiding it. He'd been hiding what was happening at the virology lab, the Wuhan virology lab, where we all sort of now believe, at least I believe, the virus first came from. And so on top of that, there's Donald Trump, who should be demanding some answers, like, hey, tell us why wouldn't you tell us what happened? We really want to know. Instead of doing that, Instead of doing that, he needs to, praise Xi. This is what he lands up doing. He's praising Xi for his work, saying he's doing a good job, and we'll just see how it happens. And then sending him all this PPE that you were talking about, and then going on a 25-day tour, where he's basically saying, don't worry, this isn't going to be an issue. When he told Bob Woodward it was going to be an issue, it was really deadly, 5% versus 1%. I mean, there's complicitness there that I've not seen addressed by any committee or courts or anything. And, millions of people died.
Yeah. Also, remember some of the push people had for, getting him declared, mentally incompetent, 25th Amendment, and all that. He's crazy. You listen to those tapes, he's very lucid.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's like people almost forget he's a member of SAG-AFTRA, an actors union, and he appears on TV all the time. I mean, he's not dumb. He says outrageous things, but that's the name of the game in some corners. He's very clear-headed about what's going on here. And he said one thing behind closed doors and completely the other to the American people, to their detriment. And
another thing completely to his son. This is what he told Bob Woodward was the conversation he'd had with Barron Trump, his son, when his son asked him what was going on. about coronavirus. And listen to what he says, because this is the actual truth.
I wanted to capture the moment when your son Barron asked you about this.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about that, because that's very human. And what caused him to ask you?
Well, he's just turning 14, so he was 13 when he did. And he wanted to know, Dad,
where were you, in the White House? Or?
Yeah, in the White House upstairs in his bedroom. He said, Dad, what's going on? What's going on? You know, sort of cute from a young kid, smart kid, good kid. But he goes, what's going on? You know, because it's so abnormal when you look at all of this stuff. And, you know, you turn on the news and they show a lot of places that got hit. Tell you, a very big moment was when
So just finish with Barron, if you would, sir. So he asked you, what's going on? Did he cite anything that he had heard? Or
No, but he sees it. He sees it on television. You know, he watches little television and he sees it. And I mean, honestly, Bob, and you've seen a lot of things and you've covered a lot of the biggest things ever, but have you ever seen anything that has gotten, I mean, there's nothing else even that they talk about. They don't talk about anything else.
And they did on NBC tonight a 6-minute segment about how to wash your hands perfectly.
Yeah,
so imagine that.
Nobody's ever seen anything like this.
So you told Barron, you said it's bad, and then
I said no. I said it's a very bad thing, but we're going to straighten it out.
Did he have any other questions about
he said,
how
are
you?
I said it came out of China, Barron. Pure and simple. It came out of China, and it should have been stopped. And to be honest with you, Barron, they should have let it be known it was a problem 2 months earlier, and the world would not. We have 141 countries have it now, and I said the world wouldn't have a problem. We could have stopped it easily, and they didn't want to do that. They waited and waited, kept it secret. Then we started hearing things coming out. I told him how it was working, and I said, and now the whole world is infected and inflicted with this.
And did he seem comforted by it, or did he wanted to?
Okay, so that's really the end of that clip. So he did know everything about the Chinese delay and about the secrets they were keeping and all of that. Yet he still went out publicly and praised Xi. He still went out and supported him. And then he went on his own 3-week delay of coronavirus implementation of, emergency rule in the United States while he was denying it happened. I mean, what is going on between these two leaders that got them to each keep these events secret? I mean, I don't know. This strikes me as one of the biggest stories ever and involved, millions of people dying and a massive attack of biological warfare on a country, possibly. I would lean into that direction. And it's sort of one of these things, oh, well, just 1 million people died or whatever. But it's crazy that this happened in the way it did and that the president was allowed to neglect his duties, not look after the American people for that period of time, didn't even think about rerunning. I mean, that's crazy.
There is a lot to this story. We could do a lot just on the insider trading done by members of the government who made very curiously timed trades. And, and we've had proposals to make that illegal. And then some people have been opposed to that for some reason. There's a lot of this that is going to be probably hard to deal with in public if for no other reason than you're talking about military intelligence level information here. This is, the Pentagon has its own medical intelligence division. I forget where it's organized under. But we also have the CIA. We have a number of manners of measuring what's going on. A lot of that's going to be top secret and classified.
But almost everyone agrees now. I think not almost everyone, but there's certainly all the latest reporting just out this week and all the latest analysis again is pointing to the lab as being the origin of this particular virus, and there being no other animal that's been identified as the origin of this. So every few weeks you get a different version of this, and different sides argue their point of view. But considering it's been this long and no other intermediary animal has been discovered, it just seems like it came from that lab. I mean, it's sort of hard to imagine it came from anywhere else. Maybe not deliberate, maybe it was just an accident, but it certainly looks like that's where the outbreak began. And there were weeks of the Chinese Communist Party keeping its secrets. And then there were weeks where Donald Trump did downplay it, even though he was taking it quite seriously at the beginning. I would like to know, just as a citizen of the world, what happened in those weeks to cause that to happen. And, it can't just be accidental that we sent off our PPE to them.
Of course not. I mean, and how many of the tests did we get back that were inaccurate? How much DNA, genetic information about American citizens was generated, and where'd that data go? And how much did these pharmaceutical companies that are really problematic, some of them, how much did they know about this in advance? There's some questions there. Those are all
big questions.
Big
old questions. We do need to get the answers to them. I do think they'll have a coronavirus committee set up by next. I mean, they've had a few, but they might do one in the next House. And if that, I'll be interested to see what comes out of that. And I do hope the DOJ starts investigating Trump for some of this stuff too, because millions of people died because of this pandemic, and it caused enormous hardship for many, many others. But back to the elections. You have 7 days now to save democracy and save us from the likes of Donald Trump, and Jair Bolsonaro and whatever. It's America's chance now to express itself, to show the world who they are. Take it seriously, because, democracy is so precious. And I know, going back to the top of the show, what it was like growing up in South Africa, where you lived in an autocratic state and living in fear and not really trusting anybody and living behind walls and, hearing things that were going on, but never really being sure that they were going on because the reporting was so scant. Knowing that there's violence and people dying nearby, but you're not really sure why. The censorship that existed on almost every level, the surveillance of people, the control over where people could move, could live, could talk, could do, you couldn't sit next to a black person on the bench, at the park bench, if you were white. I mean, that's how ridiculous the control of life in South Africa got. And it wasn't because white people hated black people hated white people. It's because they lost control of it. They lost the ideals of a democracy, and they landed up becoming, the worst kind of autocracy that you can have. And democracy is really precious. America is the only country in the world that really, really, really has it. And for that reason alone, you should be fighting for it and protect your rights, because they are going to come after your rights after this. They are. If they win, they'll be after everything.
I mean, all you have to do is move to Missouri. I mean, there is, virulent political strain here where it's just very autocratic, where your body isn't yours. Scientists don't get to make scientific decisions. Maybe your children really belong to the state, and a few people can decide the fate of all that. It's almost like there's a concentrated effort to reduce a citizen's agency in what they have a right over. I mean, there's a proposal out from a woman named Mary Elizabeth Coleman that would impose Missouri's laws on abortion across the state lines. So if you live in Missouri and you go to another state, that you would be legally liable back in Missouri if you had any medical procedure done that they had decided in Missouri wasn't legal in Missouri. That basically Missouri owns you. So if you go up to Vermont and something else is going on there, and it's going to be different than Missouri, and when you get back, that you're liable for that. Well, that's pretty insane. Then you add there's an amendment in 7 days here, an amendment to the Missouri Constitution that would change the National Guard here, and it's under the Department of Public Safety, and there's a judge advocate general, or the adjutant general, I should say, and it's technically under the control of the governor, but it's for national emergencies. It's the National Guard. It's the militia kept by every state. They're going to create a department of the National Guard in the state that answers directly to the governor, and its mission is changing from saving life, limb, and property in the event of an emergency either military or disaster in nature.
Disaster, yeah.
Now it's going to have for its goal, according to this this new amendment, the protection of constitutional rights under the U.S. Constitution and the Missouri Constitution.
Oh, interesting.
Where they're trying to give fetuses constitutional rights.
While taking away the rights of their mothers. I mean...
But we're talking about having a military force that enforces the Constitution, enforces it, and protects the constitutional rights. So does that mean, and remember, we've got a law in the books here saying that local police cannot talk to the ATF. The ATF wants to investigate terrorists here. So are we going to have the ATF facing off against Bradley fighting vehicles, mine-resistant armored personnel carriers, helicopters? What? And this is all at Generalissimo Mike Parsons' control? Now, when you look past this and go, wait a minute, who buys all that stuff? Well, it's the Pentagon. The Pentagon pays for all of this. Yeah. So I wonder how Secretary Austin feels about Mike Parsons putting himself up on his level in terms of command and control.
100%. That's it. But it's exactly what they're doing. I mean, what they want is sovereign control over their states. They want their national guards to act as armies. They want a divided America. They want different states answering to different presidents, and they want a different constitution. It's insane. It is un-American. And
who wants that?
They?
I mean, that's a great deal for China. Yeah. It's a great deal for any other country that can't actually fight us using, weaponry of conventional nature, having us destroy ourselves from within a million dumb ways. It works really great for them. But what is the purpose of setting up a military we already have a National Guard in case something goes wrong. Well, we need one that protects the Constitution. Well, there's no court that has its own military.
Breakaway states is what they want. Remember what Putin said about the Soviet Union being the worst disaster ever, or whatever it was that he said? And we made them breakaway states. They want the same breakaway states for America, and that's just their plan. They're not going to get it because everyone's going to vote for the Democrats next week, hopefully, in a landslide victory.
We'll see Missouri, Tajikistan. If that happens, then we get the Generalissimo has his own military force. I'm calling this Tajikistan, home of Provel. Toasted raviolis and baseball.
Exactly. And no free speech. On that note, where we still have a little bit of free speech left, have a good night, everybody. Don't forget you can support Narrative at patreon.com/narrative. Vote, 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 wherever you are. And we'll see you again on Thursday night. Have a good night, Eric. Every minute of Narrative's reporting, every story that we break is made possible by our patrons. You too can become a patron by joining at patreon.com/narrative.
Narrative, where truth lives. One day, you'll tell the story of autocrats, crooks, and kings who came for our freedom. A story of citizens who stood up to tyranny and won. The people prevailed and renewed an old vow to a more perfect union. And that was just the beginning. The story continues. Narrative, where truth lives.